going to hear about this really important idea from psychology that's been the focus of a ton of research over the last 40 years, and it's called mindset. And this work is associated with Dr. Carol Dweck, who is a Stanford psychologist, as well as a number of her colleagues. And it turns out that student and instructor mindsets have a kind of crazy impact on the learning process and the way assessments are framed, as well as the way feedback, such as grades, are interpreted by students. So Carol Dweck describes two types of mindsets that you can have about a particular discipline, such as math. So if we think about math, you might have something called a fixed mindset, and in that case, you would think that intelligence is fixed, and you might either be a math person or not a math person. On the other hand, at the opposite end of the spectrum, you might have a growth mindset about math, and in that case, you might believe that you can really grow and improve your ability in that area. And so what this reflects is something in our culture that we have this narrative of there being math people and not math people. And one of Dweck's points is that actually believing that you can grow and improve has kind of this crazy impact on how much you do learn and improve. And so it's perhaps not surprising, but incredibly powerful. For instance, just one of the many interesting studies out there was an intervention with a 7th grade class in New York City. And the students in this class were relatively low achieving, so they'd been struggling with math. And they put the students into two groups. One received training in things like study skills, but students in the experimental group were taught that intelligence is malleable and can be developed, whereas students in the control group engaged more in discussions on kind of academic issues and memory, so they didn't get this piece that intelligence is malleable. Whereas, both groups received the same amount of hours of additional kind of study skill training and support. And so what the researchers saw was that the intervention resulted in improved classroom motivation for the experimental group. Additionally, students in the control group, and I'm just going to quote from their paper here, displayed a continuing downward trajectory in grades, while the decline was reversed for students in the experimental group. So this intervention had a really big effect, and it's just one of many studies in this area. So you might wonder, where are these mindsets coming from? This is going to be a complicated issue, but a big piece is going to be some of the messages that our mentors send, and these might be folks like teachers, parents, and coaches. So take a look at this slide. This is from Dweck's Mindset book, and she has a section on praise. And here's a quote from her book about praise that's more in line with a fixed mindset. So you might say something like, "Oh, you're so brilliant, you got an A without even trying." And okay, maybe it doesn't sound so bad. It might be kind of encouraging, one would think, but you can turn this around and think about the kind of negative version of it. And it has the potential to suggest to students that if they can't get an A without studying, then maybe they're not so brilliant. So I think this can actually put a lot of pressure on students, and I've seen this show up in my own experience as a TA for physics freshmen at Berkeley, where physics professors will write these exams where it's pretty impossible to get an A, and often the best grade is something like an 80%. And I watch students really struggle with this. These are students who often never got anything but an A in high school. And I think it's important to challenge students. Freshmen don't always realize that faculty might be writing these types of exams, and so they, instead of looking at it as a challenge, they take it to heart as maybe I'm just not good at physics. And I think it all comes back to this idea of this worry. If I'm not getting an A, then I'm not good at this. So what would it look like to praise students according to more of a growth mindset? And this is also from Dweck's Mindset book. So praise that's more in line with a growth mindset might sound something like, I like the way you tried all kinds of strategies on that math problem until you got it. You thought of a lot of different ways to do it and found the one that worked. And so praising kind of more of the hard work and the skill development is praise that's more aligned with a growth mindset. So take a minute now to consider in your own history, have you mainly been praised according to kind of a growth mindset framing, a fixed mindset framing, or somewhere in between?